Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson, Chapter 18, pages 149 through 152. The Arch-preposterous. Beelzebub continued as follows. The cause of my first meeting with that three-centered being who subsequently became my essence friend, and by whom I saw the said experiments with the omnipresent Okidanoch, was as follows. That you may better represent to yourself the events of this tale of mine, you must first of all know that at the beginning of my exile to that solar system, certain corresponding essence friends of mine, who had not taken part in those events from which the causes of my exile had issued, performed, concerning my personality, that sacred process that exists in the universe under the name of the sacred Vishnu-Schlitzbal. That is to say, concerning my personality there was implanted in the presences of those three-brained beings by means of another sacred process called Askal Nuazar, that which objective science defines by the notion, trust another like yourself. Well then, just after my arrival in that solar system Ors, when I began visiting its various planets and first descended upon the surface of the planet Saturn, it turned out, in connection with the aforesaid, that one of the beings who had undergone the sacred action of Vishnu-Schlitzbal regarding my person was what is called there the Hara-Ha-Ho-Ri of all the three-centered beings arising and existing on the planet Saturn. On the planet Saturn, a being is called Hara-Ha-Ho-Ri, who is the sole chief over all the other beings on that planet. Similar being chiefs exist also on the other planets, upon which three-brained beings breed. They are differently named on different planets, and on your planet Earth, such a chief is called a king. The only difference is that while everywhere else, even on the other planets of the same system, there is one such king for the whole of the given planet, on your peculiar planet, Earth, there is a separate king for every accidentally segregated group of these favorites of yours, and sometimes even several. Well then, when I first descended on the surface of the planet Saturn, and mingled with the three-centered beings there, it chanced that I had occasion the next day to meet the Hara-Ha-Ho-Ri himself of the planet Saturn, and during what is called our exchange of subjective opinions, he invited me to make his own Ha-Ro-Ri, that is his own palace, the chief place of my existence during the whole of my sojourn on their planet. And this I did. So, my boy, when we were once talking, simply according to the flow of what is called being associative mentation, and happened to touch upon the question, among other things, of the strange results actualized in the manifestations of the particularities of the omnipresent Okidanoch, the venerable Hara-Ra-Ru-Ri of the planet Saturn first mentioned that one of his learned being subjects, by name Har-Hark, had recently devised for the elucidation of many of the previously unexplained properties of that cosmic substance an exceedingly interesting appliance, which he called Ra-Ha-Ha-Ra-Har, the chief demonstrating part of which is called a Har-Har-Hart-Zaha. And further, he offered to make, if I wished, the necessary arrangements for showing me all these new inventions and for giving me every possible explanation of them. The result of it all was that the following day, escorted by one of that venerable Hara-Ha-Ho-Ri's court, I went to the place of existence of that Gonahur Har-Hark, where I first saw those novel elucidatory experiments with the omnipresent Okidanoch. Gonahur Har-Hark, who afterwards, as I've already told you, became my essence friend, was then considered one of the foremost scientists among the ordinary three-brained beings of the whole universe, and all his constatations, as well as the elucidatory apparatuses he had invented, were everywhere widespread, and other learned beings on the various planets were using them more and more. Here it will do no harm to remark that I also, thanks only to his learning, had later in my observatory on the planet Mars that Tescahuano which, when it was finally established, enabled my sight to perceive, or as is said, approach the visibility of remote cosmic concentrations 7,285,000 times. Strictly speaking, it was owing to just this Tescahuano that my observatory was afterwards considered one of the best constructions of its kind in the whole universe. And most important of all, it was by means of this Tescahuano that I myself thereafter could, even while staying at home on the planet Mars, relatively easily see and observe the processes of the existence occurring on the surfaces of those parts of the other planets of that solar system, which, in accordance with what is called the common cosmic harmonious movement, could be perceived by being's sight at the given moment. When Gurnjieff Harhark was informed who we were and why we had come, he approached us and forthwith very amiably began his explanations. Before beginning his explanations, I think it not inadvisable to warn you, once and for all, that all my conversations with various three-centered beings arising and existing on various planets of that system where I was obliged to exist for the sins of my youth, as for instance in the present case the conversation with this Gurnjieff Harhark, which I am now about to relate to you while we travel in the spaceship Karnak, all proceeded in dialects still quite unknown to you, and sometimes even, by the way, in such dialects the consonances of which were quite indigestible for perception by normal being functions assigned for this purpose. And so, my boy, in view of all this, I shall not repeat these conversations word for word, but shall give you only their sense in our speech, continuing, of course, to employ those terms and specific names, or rather those consonances produced by what are called being vocal cords, which consonances are used by your favorites of the planet Earth, and which have now become for you, owing to continued repetition during my tales about them, habitual and easily perceived. Yes, it must be noticed here that the word Gurnjieff is used by the three-brained beings on the planet Saturn in courtesy. They utter it before the name of one whom they are addressing. It is the same with your favorites of the planet Earth. They also have added to the name of every person the word Mr., or sometimes a whole meaningless phrase expressing the notion for which our Honorable Mullah Nasruddin has the following sentence, and namely, he says, "Nevertheless, there's more reality in it than in the wiseacrings of an expert in monkey business." Well then, my boy, when this subsequent essence friend of mine, Gurnjieff Harhark, was informed of what was required of him, he invited us by a sign to approach one of the special appliances which he had made, and which, as it later turned out, was named by him Harhark Zaha,